first time ever. Maybe we burn through this super quick. So first thing on the agenda is the deep dives. I'm going to schedule one for this async context stuff. We sort of have a deck. I need to incorporate some feedback into the deck, but I think that does a good I think it's a good way for, I think, to try and start communicating this and drive a conversation around it. So I'll try and schedule that in maybe not next week, but maybe the week after. So I will do that. Anybody else have anything on that one? Okay, moving on. So tiers of support, I saw a bunch of activity. I haven't looked at any of them. It looks like, Michael, you're in the loop on that.
Yep. So basically, you know, I submitted the PR. There's been a bunch of discussion earlier. I think just yesterday, if I remember, maybe the day before, I updated to factor in all of the feedback so far. Joey's chimed in with a little bit more, but I think we just need to keep pushing to the point where people are comfortable approving. We have a couple of approvals so far, but, you know, we should get more people jumping in and saying yes. And particularly from this group, it would be good to see people either adding more comments or saying, hey, yeah, it looks good to go. But okay. I think that's nothing else specific to discuss this week, unless somebody has something in particular that they want to bring up in terms of the discussion that has gone on in the issue itself.
I don't have anything. Anyone have anything else on that one? Okay, moving on. So async hooks. I don't know if there's been any update there.
Yeah, I think this is still Mateo's thing. There's this one PR that's been ongoing for weeks, months now.
About
introducing a resource that you can use from with get current resource. The idea back then was that if you had a JavaScript object, you can use a weak map to use it as a key to hold onto metadata that you want to store. In addition to that async operation, and this way you don't need a destroy hook anymore to, you know, clean up metadata once the async operation is done. That would be as opposed to, you know, async ID, which is an integer that you cannot use as a key into a weak map.
It replaces the async ID.
Well, it doesn't really replace, because we want to keep it backwards compatible, so that and there are definitely use cases where an ID kind of makes sense.
Yeah, because you need the ID, like.
But, you know, you can store the ID on the resource. Right?
Oh, so then you would just look up the resource, look up the ID from the resource, and then the ID would be a separate parameter.
So, okay. So the API with the ID wouldn't change. It's just that we would also expose a resource object that we could use, you know, for, like I said, weak maps. And in initial prototypes, it would actually recover performance significantly if you use it in combination with a weak map.
And is it backwards compatible in the point that people could use it in the way that's not performant, but if they choose to use it in the way that is, it works better?
Yes. Yeah, okay. The original design was that we would still have to destroy hook. People can still register destroy hook if they want to, if they need to. But if they don't, then we wouldn't fire it. And that would also save, you know, we wouldn't have to allocate a persistent handle with the weak callback anymore in V8. And that would make things a lot more performant.
But then you can achieve the same thing by basically setting your own weak, using the object, because so that object becomes collectible when equivalently to when the delete hook would have been fired?
Yes. So essentially it would get garbage collected, and once it gets garbage collected, whatever hangs off it through the weak map would also be garbage collected.
Right, okay. Yep.
But it's not exactly when the destroy hook would fire, right?
Well, you don't need to fire a destroy hook because
Right, but I think what Michael just said, and maybe this is just being, a bit pedantic, but what he said is that the thing would be GC'd whenever the destroy hook would have fired, but that's not the case, right?
Yeah, that's not what I meant. But
okay, perfect.
I meant it's like the object becomes collectible at the same point as the destroy hook would have been fired.
Right.
You're no guarantee as to when it will be collected.
Well, presumably that if no one has
after
a
that.
reference on it, right? Like if somebody keeps a reference on it, then they're kind of hosed for whatever reason.
Right. Except that it makes it a lot easier for V8's GC because GC only cares about what's alive and not what's dead. And if you want a destroy hook, what actually happens is that the GC holds onto a list of weak list of objects that it checks every time after GC whether they're still alive, and if they're not, then you would fire a destroy hook. And keeping that list and going through that list is costly.
I see. So this is just the destroy. So this is for async hooks all up, or this is just for the promise hook stuff?
Well, the idea is that it would greatly benefit promise hooks,
Sure.
but we would have it for all async hooks.
I see. Okay.
And I think the PR material started the PR like two months ago, but it's been stuck, and I'm not entirely sure what the status is.
Okay.
I can mention, I'm not sure if it's important, but I did try to run his branch with our APM agent that is using async hooks, and it performed really well. So from an APM point of view, it's really nice in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it has to get landed first, right?
What is it that? Well, I guess you don't know offhand, but I'm just wondering if it's like, are people actually objecting, or is it just that it's?
I think Andreas Madsen had some objections. I'm not entirely sure which ones because I haven't had time to look into it. I was hoping that Matteo would be on top of things, but he's not here.
Because I wonder if, like, trying for a future meeting, bringing all the people who are most active and commenting to this meeting might help push it forward.
He wrote in the today's meeting issue that these times are really hard. Like him being Matteo, that these times for this meeting is really hard for him to make. So we might want to maybe consider something else, some other time for that.
I mean, we can also definitely just set up a meeting specific for this topic.
Yep.
To drive this forward.
Yeah.
I know one thing that was mentioned in the concerns about the current resource thing was I don't really understand why it's an issue, but there was some concerns about like resource reuse. So there's certain things like the HTTP agent reusing handles. I don't see why that would result in the resource being reused, though. But I guess that's how it currently works, maybe, for some things.
I really have no idea.
Yeah, I want to say maybe I'm confusing PRs because I'm not certain of the one that you're talking about, but that there was some pushback at some point about exposing the resource because people can then start doing things with it. But that may be a different PR that I'm thinking of. What's the PR number? Do you know offhand?
Oh, not really. It's been a while since I looked at it. Let me try to find it. Yeah, it's 21313.
Can you just paste the link in the chat?
I will do that. Where do I even? There. Yeah, I pasted it.
All right, so Anne has also asked for changes. It says we make no guarantees that the resource objects is unique for every async operation.
Yeah, unfortunately, these are details I have no insight into. So, yeah. So there's one change that we've been want to do in V8, but haven't had time to. But I hope we can get it done until Node 11, which is changing the promise hooks from isolate dependent into per isolate into per context, so that you can use JS functions like JavaScript functions as callbacks directly instead of providing C++ callbacks.
Sorry, can you say that all again?
So currently the V8 API for promise hooks takes, I think, 4 different C++ callbacks for different, or no, it's just one C++ callback with different promise hook types that it passes in. Instead, what we want to do is and create an API that takes 4 different JavaScript functions for the different promise hook types.
And then you don't have to use the native JavaScript boundary.
Right. So that would also mean that since JavaScript functions are bound to the context, to the native context, you would have them installed on the context instead of on the isolate. So those would be then, per context, which solves a bunch of issues with. I think Electron has this issue where you mix contexts, and then we would also directly call from JavaScript into JavaScript in many cases, which makes it cheaper because we don't have to go into C++ anymore. And in long-term future, we could even imagine inlining some of these. But like I said, it's something we wanted to do, but we haven't gotten around. And currently it's summer, and summer in Europe, people are on vacation mostly.
How does that relate to this particular issue? I'm sorry, I don't.
It doesn't directly relate. It's just that it's a change that would happen in parallel.
It relates to async hooks thing. So
okay, that I get.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, there's not much news, I guess.
Okay. And that was mentioned in, there was a doc that somebody wrote at some point. Maybe it was you that wrote it, Yang, and this was a couple months ago about some things that could be done. And this was mentioned as one of those things. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. Anything else on async hooks? Okay, so context formalization stuff. We've got, like a PR up. Again, it's like feedback is appreciated. Like I said, we'll schedule a deep dive. We've got a deck that walks people through with some pictures that hope will draw a conversation around that. Either it's like nobody cares, or it's super complicated, or we're crazy and nobody wants to tell us we're crazy. So. I think any of that feedback, whatever it may be, is appreciated. So don't hold back.
Correct me if I'm wrong. The thing that's linked to from the agenda, that's an issue. You mentioned that was a PR.
There's a PR that's opened in the diagnostics repo, which is trying to get to some level of, and it's PR 197. Right, which is trying to get to some kind of level of consistent sort of terminology around async context and what it means, right? I think the goal is like, can we get everybody to agree on the terminology, and then we can talk about what it means to implement it, and we can talk about how this sort of formalization relates to async hooks, right? I think if people provide feedback on this, it's useful, right? And so let me see if I can paste it in here. So that's the PR. So yeah, I mean, we don't have to, and like I said, I'll schedule a deep dive on that. Okay, anything else on that one? Okay, so then the last thing here on the agenda is the trace event stuff. I don't know if anybody can speak to anything going on there. I know I saw some stuff flow by in email. James was working on stuff maybe for trace events around some of the new promise event stuff that's been added, something like that.
So there's one piece that's a little bit new about trace events. So currently, I think Node.js still uses a default tracing controller that V8 provides, which is a very bare bone implementation. It uses some sort of, I think, a ring buffer, and it has race conditions in there because it's just very basic. And I don't think even Chrome is using that. And I think in the next half a year, we want to switch to something better. There's this thing called Perfetto, which is being developed by part of the Android team that works on Chrome, which is supposed to be this unified way of doing tracing, and it's supposed to be compatible with Chrome tracing as well, has higher throughput. And we're thinking of switching the default tracing controller in V8 to that. And Ali is actually excited about that. Yeah.
Okay. But you think that's months off?
That we wouldn't get that done even until Node 11, because Perfetto is fairly new. We still have to evaluate like whether it matches what we need, and then figure out how to import it into V8 and make it work. Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's just a way to marshal all the tracing information into something that's can be easily transported.
Okay. So I know that like the stability issues with some of the tracing stuff has come up in the past, and I think like one of the comments I just read was somebody wanted to backport maybe some of the tracing stuff, and someone was like, no, don't do that because it's not stable. So are there any alternatives to this default tracing provider that you guys have in V8, or?
So the default tracing controller is really just kind of a mock, right? It's just a ring buffer where you can, create new tracing categories. You can pull whether the ones that you created are there, like whether you enabled them, and then you can write to the ring buffer. And I don't think there is even a way to read the ring buffer while you are recording. So you cannot really stream anything. And it's just there for testing, essentially. I mean, on the V8 end, the only user of that is D8, which is just used for testing. And there are some known race condition issues. So I'm not surprised that stability is not great.
So then is the answer, like, is it possible then to take like whatever Chrome is using or whatever in Chromium and just grab that implementation for the short term? Does that unblock things?
Maybe. I'm not entirely familiar with what Chrome is using though, so I can't really tell.
Not using your mock implementation. They're using something that's presumably somewhat richer.
I really don't know. I just recently got into this topic, and yeah. But so the good news is we're actually looking into this and are trying to find a better solution.
Right. All right, anything else on number 84? All right, anything else from anybody? All right.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Talk to everybody next time. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye, everyone.